So it's got some good perks to it. It's good perks to it. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get rocking and rolling here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another expert interview episode of the Marketing Wizards Inner Circle. I am so blessed and excited to be here today with my buddy, Gresham Harkless. This man, you guys, is an absolute genius and an expert when it comes to podcasting and creating phenomenal content that draws your audience to you and that helps you get out there and broaden your reach. So today we're going to dive deep into the power of podcasting, how to use it in your own company, how to make a big impact with your own customer database with it. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here with my good friend from Washington, D.C., well, just outside of Washington, right, Gresh? Gresham Harkless, welcome to the show, my friend.
Michael, super excited to be here. I think I'm even more excited than you are. Super blessed as well. So thank you so much for providing the opportunity.
Hey, my friend, no problem whatsoever. So we are going to dive in today into a hot topic. Like, this is one of those topics that so many people are like giddy excited about, is how do we use podcasting and how do we become a guest on podcasts to really grow our brand, grow our impact, and really extend our reach. But before we get there, tell me, because we're going to jump into that. So anybody who's watching right now, we got a bunch of people watching live, which is great. But anybody watching, we're going to get to that. But before we do, I just want Gresham to tell me, because you're not actually in Washington.
I'm not.
Right? So whereabouts are you actually from?
Yeah, so funny enough, we were talking about a little bit more about our location. You said you're about 45 minutes outside of the Vancouver area. I'm about 45 minutes outside of, well, I was about 45 minutes outside of DC, which is where I was pretty much raised, which is in this place called Woodbridge. I'm now in Springfield, Alexandria area. So that's about 15, 20 minutes outside. But I always, say, and I always, tell people DC, but you have to see if somebody's from DC, if they're familiar with DC, then you have to drill down a little bit more and say, this is exactly where I am, where I'm from, because it's not just the landmarks.
Nice. I love it. Okay, so now you've been doing podcasting, Gresh, for 10 years, right? Or for 5 years, you said, but you've been in the marketing industry for over a decade. So for those folks that are watching right now, this is a man that's got a ton of intellectual capital here, like a big brain resource for us to tap into today. So, Gresh, what have you found has been like really powerful when it comes to podcasting? Like, if you were to put something on a pedestal and say, this is one of the big reasons to use podcasting, what would that be?
There's a lot of different ways to use a podcast. And, I have this talk that I give a lot talking about, you are a media company, how to really look at marketing strategically. I compare it to like going to the grocery store to figure out what ingredients you're going to put into whatever dish you're going to make.
Okay, nice. Yep.
It's getting cold around here, so I love sweet potato pie. My mom's sweet potato pie, so I'm always thinking about what's going to go in there. And I think when you think about marketing, there's a lot of different ways that you can use these ingredients. And to drill down even more, podcasting, I think sometimes when you hear podcasting, you're thinking, Joe Rogan, how do I get advertising? How do I go and, build a huge following and all of those things? But quiet as kept, I think one of the best ways, and probably maybe I'll give you two if that's okay.
Yeah.
The first one is definitely authority positioning. Like if you are an expert at what it is that you do, the opportunity for you to get to talk about the experiences that you have, talk about the knowledge that you have, the thought leadership in that specific industry is probably one of the best kind of ways to use the podcast. If you think about, and it's probably still a little bit more of a thing where your book ends up becoming like your business card.
Sure.
It's going to be the same way with your podcast. You have the opportunity to say, why you're great at what you do. Frankly, you can even bring clients on to talk about why you're great at what it is you do without you directly beating your chest. But I think that's absolutely one of the great ways to leverage your podcast or being on, podcast episodes and being able to even compile those different episodes in shows that you've been on to have that thought authority, that authority positioning created. But another really, really great way that I think is very, very underutilized is actually the whole networking relationship building around podcasting.
Yes. Love it.
It's something that I think a lot of people will skip past. They don't even think about. If you have the opportunity to be featured on a podcast, think about building that connection, of course, with that host. But also think about going through the previous episodes and listening to those episodes, connecting with the people. Say, hey, I was also featured on episode number 100 or episode number 50. Would love to connect a little bit, hear a little bit more about what you do. So it's really a way to kind of, I guess, break through that noise. Get that opportunity to have something that you have a mutual connection and relationship with. And I think it's something that's extremely underutilized in podcasting, but definitely in other forms of digital marketing as well.
You know what? That is so great. I think we often underestimate, Gresh, how powerful our network is, right? Like how critical that is. And in fact, I don't know about you, buddy, but there have been times in my life where I've invested both time and money, right? Those two resources into a network to get ingratiated into that network, to be a part of it. I did this just about a year ago with the Napoleon Hill Institute. I was like, okay, I want to join this particular group of people. And part of it was obviously for the material, but also a big part of it was because I wanted to be in that group of people and all the value that both I could bring and I could get from being in that group. So you're absolutely right, buddy. And podcasting is such a brilliant way of doing that. And I love how you put it that podcasting can be like a book, can be your business card. So talk to us a little bit about that, because in all your marketing experience, you've probably been sharing your podcast a ton. So how does that go? Like, what does that really look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're getting to, as it gets easier and easier, and people might argue with that in terms of creating content. We have it at our fingertips. We literally have a way that we can create so many different types of content within our pockets, with our smartphones. It is going to allow and has allowed a lot more creators, so to speak. And that creator, term and that title can, extend to many different things. But at the bottom line, it's about people that are able to create podcasts just by recording what they're doing, interviews, whatever it is. You don't necessarily need all the high tech technology that you had before, or the equipment, or all of those things. You can do it with your phone. And I think what we are starting to see is even the less than high quality, the less than perfected types of content are actually a lot more connection worthy to people, because they see the rawness, they see the behind the scenes. It's not necessarily polished.
Right.
That actually has a little bit higher of an opportunity for people to really be connecting with. So I think when we talk about that, we're getting to, or might even be in this time where you're talking to somebody. And even when I reach out to people to be on the podcast, I'm looking to see if they are also podcasters. And I already know like what this conversation is going to be like, how it's going to flow, just because when you're around, I feel like when you're around other podcasters, you have a lot more of a flow to the overall conversation. It's more organic, it's more natural. So I think that when you start to connect with people and you say, oh, I have a podcast, she's like, oh, I have a podcast too. What's your podcast about? What do you cover? What types of guests do you have? Then all of a sudden, when you're thinking of having people on your show, not only is it just for that podcast and that episode that you're doing, but you're also thinking of, hey, this might be a great guest for so-and-so's podcast that I met, or Michael has a really great Marketing Wizards podcast that he drills down more. So if I meet a marketing person, I know they connect. So I think it starts to have that I think Malcolm Gladwell talked about being a connector. You start to be a lot more of a connector because you're able to create content and also know other content creators, and you're able to kind of make those connections very organically, I think.
I love that, man. I love that. And see, because I think what you're tapping into, Gresh, is this idea that your content and your channel, like I love how you say that you're a media brand. Like whether you like it or not, if you're in business, especially if you're a solopreneur or a small business, you're your own media agency, right? You and I've talked about this off air before, that you're your own media agency. And so your ability to grow your company, right? Because we're here to grow our revenue. Like, let's be honest, we want to make more sales. Okay. We want to serve more people, make more money. If you're not wanting to do that, then you're in the wrong show. All right. Like that's the whole point, right? So if that's the case, then there's a finite amount of return you can get from your dollars in. Like if you want to pay for attention, right? The way I look at it is that if you're paying for attention, so if I can take $1 and turn it into $10, right? There's only a limited amount of times I can actually do that when the social media algorithms shift and change, or the ad grows stale, or like all of that stuff wanes over time. And the reason I'm addressing this is because what you just said about connecting through your media and through your content, it doesn't wane over time. It has an exponential level of possible growth, right? Because you can jump on a podcast or you can create a podcast, right? Or create a YouTube show like I'm doing here, right? You get a great guy like Gresh on your show. Gresh talks to you. You talk to Gresh. You put that out there into the world. Somebody then reaches out, or Gresh knows this person. They connect them to me. And you can start to multiply and duplicate your reach over a wide range. And to me, you're absolutely right, Gresh, in that building yourself a channel, like a media channel, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's a podcast, whether it's just on a specific social media platform, it is the most powerful way of exponentially growing your reach. Because the dollars, they start to reduce in their effectiveness. It just happens, right? And then you got to get back into creativity. You got to test another dozen ads, see which one works. Like, it's a long process. It takes a lot of time and effort. But growing a channel exponentially this way by reaching out, networking, as you put it, that has this potential to really snowball what it is that you do. Would you agree with me there, buddy?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think when you start to really think, and one of the beautiful parts of all these digital tools is that you're going from one to one to one to many. And when you're able to reach more and more people and also have this, archive, for lack of a better term, so that you can send
Yeah,
people that you meet today, a year down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the line, back to this same video, the same interview to talk about some of those foundational elements. That's going to be gold, because sometimes for
right.
you being able to kind of leverage your time, leverage your resources, the time and the money, um, kind of creatively and strategically, the best way to do it is sometimes having that piece of content that's already there. We're seeing that more and more potential clients and customers are a lot more informed, and they're a lot more informed because they're Google searching, they're looking at reviews, they're
Mm-hmm.
doing all those things. So why not provide them more information and give them some, I guess, tools along the journey so that they can say yes when they actually do get on that call with you, or they do see your ad or whatever it is that
Right.
that you're working on. It's going to complement all the things that you're doing, but only if you start to create that media company, or even be on other media companies and start to archive that so that you have that information there.
I love that, man. I love that, because I always put it that your marketing is a habitat. It's like an environment, right? And people are going to come in and they're going to see, oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at the plant on that rock that's been there for 3 years, aka a piece of content you built on YouTube or on your podcast or whatever, right? And they're seeing the whole environment of your marketing. Yeah, you got their attention with an ad, but they're going to come and see your whole environment of marketing, your whole habitat of it. So it's important to have all those pieces in place. I love it. Now, I want to dive into your advice on how to get a podcast started. Okay, what things to do and we're going to dive into that in just a minute. But before we get there, Gresh, I want to know, why do you do this? Right? Like, why, the old Simon Sinek question, what's Gresh's why? Like, why did you build a marketing agency, and why have you spent all this time? Because, man, you and I will both agree, it is a shit ton of time to grow a media channel from zero to something. We've reached just over 1,000 YouTube followers. It's been a year in the making to get there, slogging away. So why invest all this time? Why do this effort? What's drives you, my friend?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And funny enough, I have to go probably even farther back before
Mm,
I started everything to answer that question. And when I was kind of even in college, I was trying to figure out, what I wanted to be when I grew up. At that time, it was really just like, what am I going to major in? I can't
have you
even,
grown up yet? Like, has that
he's
happened?
still working on it here and
Yeah.
there. There you go. It's all relative, right? But I think a lot of times when you're trying to figure out all those things, my answer is always to go back.
Mm,
So what I did is I went back to what I did when I was a kid, and one of the things that kind of stood out to me, I was that kid that sold potato chips on the playground and did things like that.
nice.
But I started what was then the family newspaper, and I did that because I was about 10 years old, and my dad was in the military, he was in the Air Force, so he
Okay.
got reassigned to go outside of the United States for an entire year, and it was super
Oh,
heartbreaking. Cried, boohooed like a baby, all of those things during that time. But we didn't have all these snazzy tools that we have now to like instantly connect with somebody right in our pocket. All we had was dial up AOL instant messenger to stay connected. Exactly. Don't call. Make sure no one
yeah,
calls
no
because
one's
you're on
calling.
the internet. So during that time, I started to like compile a lot of the things that were going on in my family. So these were stories from a squirrel that got into my grandma's house to a wedding in our family that didn't actually get started and that didn't actually go according to plan. So all those things, I was like that TMZ for our family.
For your family. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I took those and I made it into a family newspaper, Microsoft Word, clip art, all those things to compile them. And I would send them to my dad with his care box so he would know all the things that were going on in our family. So between that and me, of course, selling the subscriptions to family members,
You sold
that's
the subscriptions for the
a little
newsletter?
bit. Yes, I sold a little bit. And if anybody's listening and still might be interested, I can put something together if you want to see some archives.
Oh man,
Um,
that's awesome.
yeah, but when I was thinking of like what I wanted to do, that's one of the stories that really came back to me. My mom kept them all, so I had 2 years worth of like all these things,
Wow.
and that kind of put me in this kind of media company mindset. Of course, I
Sure.
wasn't calling it that then. I just loved to write. So to answer your question, the way that I kind of look at everything that I do is an extension of that same 10-year-old kid that's
Hmm.
collecting content and information about whatever it is that I might be interested at that time. And for me, like knowing that I wanted to start a business, knowing that I had those tendencies, I didn't really know what that was. So I said, what's the best way for me to do that? Let me go ask other entrepreneurs. So I started to do freelance writing,
Okay.
which eventually became blogs, which eventually became the podcast because I was recording them and added a intro, outro. So the reason why I started all this is just because I think that's ultimately part of my DNA. And
Right.
I'm just crazy passionate about entrepreneurship. I feel like it always equals hope and opportunity in so many different ways. So the best way for me to feel like make a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs might say, is for me to go and capture the stories, capture the knowledge, and learn myself as well too from all these super successful entrepreneurs and business owners. So that's a lot of my why. And funny enough, one side thing is that when I first started my podcast, I had people that had featured on my blog on the podcast because it was already a warmer connection. And I
Sure.
actually had somebody during my first episode that said one of the reasons that she started her business is called No Monaja, was because we asked her and a lot of other people, like, what does being a CEO mean to them? And it sparked her to really think about what she was doing in her job, what her why
Hmm.
was, all those things. And I say all that to say that sometimes when you're doing things, and I at that time and before that, I didn't really know. It wasn't until she told me that story that it made me say, okay, this is my why. This is exactly what kind of gets me going to hear those stories and try to impact others. So long-winded answer, Michael, but that's a little bit about my why.
No, I love it, man. I love it. I think that I mean I love what you just said. Entrepreneurship equals hope. I think that's great. I mean, to me, entrepreneurship, aka sort of like pioneering business stuff, is really the thing that shifts the world. Right? That's what changes things. For a long time, it was kind of religious movements or anything else, but for the last probably 700-800 years, it's been a lot of business, entrepreneurship, people in the background toiling away, inventing, creating, pushing the envelope, and in some cases, obviously, to monetize that and then become entrepreneurs and distribute. But what you just said there is that you don't know the effect you're having. Right? One of the great things about building a podcast, my friends, or building a channel or a media channel is you don't know who you're affecting. You don't know that you're changing that 17-year-old kid's life or that 47-year-old woman's life. Like, you don't know you're doing that. You're putting out great content, interviewing awesome people like Gresh, you're doing your thing, and here's what you do: you give it away. Right? Like, I remember, because I was an actor for many years, I don't know how my performance affected somebody else. All I knew was that I got to play the scene. I got to I got to tell this story with these people, and how Gresham interprets that or how that makes him feel or what that does for his life is up to him. Right? And so to me, what's happening, and you were talking about this earlier, how content's become easier, is this ability to marry art and business. Right? It's become easier now than ever before to marry artistry and business together. And so for people that want to do an interview show like this, or who have a deep level of authoritative expert knowledge like you were referencing before, Gresh. This is such a great medium to get into because it allows you to explore these topics, and it allows you to express yourself and spread your influence, right? And then those people that really would love to do business with you or are affected by it, they're going to go do their thing, or they're going to reach out to you. So it's a win-win all around. I absolutely love it. Love it. Okay, so Gresh, if I want to get a podcast started today, it is Wednesday, 1st of November, 2023. Right? Happy Halloween, by the way.
Thank you.
What do I do? What's the first step? What should I do if I want to start a podcast?
Yeah, I would say my questions that I really go back to are they going to be the same no matter what type of marketing you're going to do, and I consider podcasting to be a type of marketing.
Sure.
3 questions I would make sure that I answer before I even hop into trying to figure out how to do a podcast, what to do on a podcast, so on and so forth. Ask yourself, who are you targeting? Why are you actually creating this podcast, and who is it going to be for? We talked about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship to me at its heart is about problem solving. So obviously most of us are going to be thinking about it from a business standpoint, but think about whatever problems you can want to solve. Even if you're the mom that maybe wants to get a traffic stop sign put up on the corner, think about what problem you're going to be able to solve. Be very clear about who you're targeting with that content that you're going to be creating, because that's going to help put so many things in connection. So paint that avatar, figure out who you're targeting. After that, know your why. And I kind of touched on that a little bit. Why are you doing this? Are you trying to get that traffic stop sign put up there? Are you trying to sell more books so that you can get more speaking opportunities? Are you trying to drive more people to buy the thing on your e-commerce site, that widget that you want to sell multiple copies of? Whatever that is, figure out exactly what you're trying to do as far as and what success ultimately looks like, what your goal is. And then we touched on the most important question that no one ever wants to answer, but everybody has to answer, which is the resources. Are you putting in the time? Or are you putting up the money? Or are you doing a combination of both? A lot of times, if you're just starting today and you just want to bootstrap it, you probably have more time than you have money.
Sure.
And so that's really the 3 questions that you want to try to jump into. But I think once you get clear on that, that's going to help you figure out probably what's the next most important step, which is understanding what exactly your podcast is going to be about. You can start to think about, certain titles for your podcast and start to do the looking of, what might be there. But I think after you get those things cleared away, it's going to help you to take the next step and the step after that. If you want to really jumpstart things quickly, there's a platform that was formerly named Anchor that is now named Spotify for podcasters that can get you started very, very quickly. It's going to get you on all the different podcast platforms very quickly, free to use. And I actually, anytime I test out, and actually my podcast I have now, the IMCO podcast, I actually started it out there before I moved it over to what I use for my podcast hosting. But really great platform to kind of test out ideas. And it'll get a lot of things up for you pretty quickly.
Okay, and that's the Spotify podcasting.
So Spotify for podcasters. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. And so if I've got who I want to talk to, I have a really good reason as to why I want to talk to them. And I know that, I've got some dollars put away to maybe get some nice graphics done or get a nice intro recorded or do some of those things. Because these are the things, my friends, that you got to remember, right? These are some of the little things that put the professional touch on your podcast, right, Gresh? Like having a really professionally done intro, a professionally done outro, like just a little 6 or 7 seconds, even something that, is consistent and puts that sort of cherry on top of what your content is. As Gresh put it earlier, I think when you're recording, people will put up with little glitches or little sound bumps or whatever they're gonna, because they're there to support and they want to listen to you and they want to hear what you got to say, or they want to hear what your guest has to say. Because normally you're a guest, not me. But having a really nice polished intro will just put the cherry on top of that stuff. So isolate some resources for that. Okay. What then would be your advice, my friend, on how to grow it, how to get it out there? What have you done because you've done over 1,600 episodes of your podcast. 1,600, you guys. 1,600. Yeah, there's a 1-6 with 2 zeros afterwards. Okay, 1,600 episodes this man has done. So how would you grow your reach then? What would you do with the podcast afterwards to go, okay, I've done it, it's there, I've got 2 episodes, 3 episodes, 4 episodes. How do I now extend it and gather more listeners?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, you have for your podcast, which is why I think it's so important that you go back to that question about why are you doing your podcast?
Mm,
Because you can grow and grow and grow. And I think it's of course important to look at metrics as a digital marketer. Of course, it's important to metric tracking as much as you can, know as much as you can about the people that are listening to the episodes. But of course, there's always that limit. But you want to know the why you're creating your podcast, because if you lose sight of that, you will be chasing metrics, and those metrics may not turn to the dollars that you ultimately hoped, or the
okay.
connections or relationships, whatever that might be. But in order
Do
to
you find
grow,
that happens with a lot of people? They start chasing metrics rather than like really what their why for the podcast is? Like it shifts on them?
yeah, no question. I mean, I think it shifts because it's so noisy about all the things that you need to do. And I think
Okay.
us marketers sometimes contribute a lot to that, because we say that you should be doing X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C, when in reality, you have to go back to those 3 foundational questions, which is why I say they're so important before you get started. Because as soon as you say, I want to start a podcast, and you post it in numerous Facebook groups, you will be getting people sending you DMs all the time telling you what you need to do. But you want to
Right.
stay true to that ultimate goal of what exactly you're trying to accomplish. And for me specifically, again, we use the podcast a lot as a way for us to build relationships and connections, so that really resonated with me. But we also have a website support, maintenance, and SEO company, so a lot of
Right.
what we try to do is build the SEO and on our sites, and on each of the episodes, and on each of those blog posts that are created. So as much as it was important to, of course, have the guest on and promote the guest, which is, of course, high priority, we also really wanted to think strategically about the problem that the guest was solving.
Mm,
What might exactly be the title tag, meta description, the subject, the title that we use for these specific posts?
right.
Because if we're thinking like this is a podcast for other business owners, like what problems are they having? Are they trying to drive home more revenue? Do they have issues with hiring? By having an HR person, a consultant there on the podcast, that's of course great. And saying, okay, so and so, that's an HR consultant, is great. But what might be better, more search engine friendly, is saying how to continue to drive potential hires to your organization and retain them. That's a little bit more powerful, a little bit more punchier, especially from an SEO perspective, because that's
Mm,
what people are going to be looking for. But that's just one part of the coin. That's SEO is definitely a lot more of a long term focus type of marketing strategy. But also don't forget that the people that are on the show are there to also promote the things that they're doing. So by arming them with the graphics, the information of when their podcast going live, the link, all of those things, and teaching them, and for lack of a better term, coaching them up on how to share their
mm.
podcasts. That's what's going to get you into those other communities, those other listeners and viewers, and those audiences that they already have in place. So you're trying to create a win-win opportunity, and sometimes especially if you're a marketer, you probably have a pretty good idea, at least a better idea than most people, on how to market.
Right.
But the person that you might have on the show may not have that same awareness or
Okay.
understanding, and being able to kind of arm them with that information is going to help you to kind of hit that easy button, so you tap into that other audience, and drive hopefully more downloads and traffic to your site.
I love that, buddy. I love that. So, pardon me, when you want to grow your podcast, don't forget that your guests, right, they may need guidance on how to help you do that, right? Like they're going to need obviously graphic material and links to drive people from their social media back to wherever you're hosting your podcast, all that kind of thing. And then, you got to get out there and as you put it, Gresh, you got to be promoting yourself, right? Like you've got to be promoting yourself. So Gresh does a lot of this stuff to crank up SEO, which is great, for his own website and what his own services are. But whatever it is that you do, you've got to be, really cranking up the amount of reach that you're pushing, right? Start promoting your content in lots of different places and in little ways. It can be an image with a link that says, "Hey, we recently covered X topic, right, in this episode." Boom, over they go, right? So fantastic stuff, buddy. Fantastic stuff. Okay, so now before we sign off here, Gresh, this has been fantastic. I hope everyone's got great value. We've had a whole bunch of people on here live, which is awesome. So I hope you got great value out of this, you guys. If you have any questions, you can put them into the comment section here. So send them over. If anybody has any questions for Gresh, we'll get to those right now before we get to our final few from me to him. So if you got any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. We will see them. They'll pop up here and we'll bring them up. So if you got any questions, in the meantime, if you want to connect with Mr. Gresham, you can connect with him right here. iamgresh.com. You can go right over to that spot if you want to connect. What are they going to see there, Gresh?
They're going to see a lot of the different things that I'm involved in, but specifically, I think that's relevant for everybody who's listening to this. I have a site called Help for Podcasts. That's going to have a lot of the things that we talked about if you're trying to start your podcast. But frankly, too, like I say, starting a media company is the best thing that you can do. Next best thing is hopping on somebody else's media company, their blog, their podcast, whatever that might be. So you'll see some resources as well on like how to leverage that, and just lots and lots of content that we've been creating.
Love it. Okay, perfect, excellent. So my final few questions for you here, buddy. My final few questions. So if we go out 1 year from now, where's Gresham's business? Like, what is it that you're doing? What would you love to have accomplished in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think we're at this kind of pivot point where we're looking a lot more into being a lot more selective with the clients that we're working with from the digital marketing standpoint, and really putting a lot more investment into the properties that we have. Like I mentioned, one of them, the Helfer podcast, but also the podcast itself that we have. And getting back again, every time I'm thinking of like what I'm trying to do, I'm thinking back to that 10-year-old kid. So how can I create that newspaper, that quote unquote family newspaper that's going to solve that problem? So that's the filter that I'm always trying to think about, putting things through. And now, as we, of course, have been able to build from a client service standpoint, I'm also thinking like, how can we take those resources and also invest it into getting, more eyeballs, more opportunities, making a little bit of an impact in a different way, while also hopefully, being able to kind of support the client services as well too. But that's a little bit more of like where I see the pivot happening over the next year and beyond.
Nice. Love it, buddy. Excellent. So a lot of good growth then on the way for you.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's always the plan, right?
Any any programs that you're about to launch or anything like that that you want to tell anybody about?
Yeah, so I think we're working a lot more on, one of the questions I asked on my podcast is for what I call a CEO hack. CEO hacks, a little bit more app, book, or habit that people have that make them more effective and efficient. So we've been working on, for lack of a better term, a directory of all these hacks. Like, what are the efficiency hacks that people are leaning on? What are they doing? How are they leveraging these tools and tidbits? So we have a directory that's in place, and we want to start kind of improving that directory from a sense of the tactical how-to content. You have this tool that you're using, and it sounds cool. It does a lot of things, but how is that going to help me as an entrepreneur, CEO, or business owner? Right. So really trying to leverage that to provide you, of course, the information about the tool, but also exactly how that tool is going to happen. And we've heard like one of the most, transformational, I think, things that, is happening now is AI. And there's so many tools that are happening, an influx of them, and they all sound cool. They all can do all these things. But again, from a practicality standpoint, how do you kind of implement that into your business? Because just as we talked about marketing as a tool, AI, I think, can be a tool if it supports what you're already doing. Yeah. And I think, just like going to the grocery store, seeing you need this, that, or the third, AI is that, where you see this tool that does all these things, but how is that really going to help you in your operations, in your business? So I think really developing that and giving people a little bit more of lay of the land on like practicality on how this works is going to be something we're going to be putting a lot of time and resources into.
I love it, man. I absolutely love it. We being in the content world ourselves and creating a lot of content. Just before we wrap up here, one of the things that I've noticed is that people are using the AI to create short form video, and it's like, but AI will cut the video in weird places. It'll think that the thought is done, but you add on another piece that a human obviously is going to hear, but the AI doesn't notice. And it doesn't clean up a lot of stuff. Right? So the graphics that it throws in are sometimes weird. The captions sometimes don't make sense. And the audio is never cleaned. Right? So if you've got weird something in the background, or like we recently did one of a dog trainer, one of our clients, and like there's so much wind in the background, we were able to take a lot of that stuff out. Right? So yes, AI can improve something that's already in kind of this really ideal state. But to get it to the ideal state, it still needs a whole bunch of people involved. And so it's like, and quite often I had one client, she was like, I use this AI tool and it was way more work to undo all the stuff that the AI did. It's useless. I'm like, yeah, well, this is what happens, right? Anyway, Gresh, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. My final question to you is, can we get you on for another episode where we dive deeper into one of these many, many amazing topics?
Michael, absolutely. With a caveat, though, I have to have you on my podcast. So if you say yes, you'll come, then absolutely, I'll be back for sure.
Okay, sounds great, my friend. Sounds great.
We'll make it happen.
Sounds great. We didn't get any questions from the audience today, but we did have lots of watchers. So thank you so much, Gresham. It's been fantastic. Much blessings to you and your whole family, my friend. Everybody watching, this has been another episode of the Marketing Wizards Inner Circle. I have been Michael. He has been Gresh. You have been awesome. And I look forward to seeing you on Friday for the live when I take your Friday morning mailbag questions on marketing. Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and ciao for now.
Bye.